What if the person you were taught to despise held the key to your salvation? In the hushed, gilded halls of the Beaumont, Chicago's bastion of old-world luxury, an elderly Japanese man became a ghost before he was even a guest. He was a problem, a silent, stubborn anomaly in a world that ran on crisp English and obsequious service. The staff, from the bellhops to the manager, saw him as a burden. The other guests saw him as an oddity to be politely ignored. But Amelia Vance, a waitress one paycheck away from disaster, saw something else in his quiet, watchful eyes. She saw a reflection of her own silent desperation, and when she finally uttered the Japanese words that had been locked away in her memory for over a decade, she did more than break a rule. She ignited a firestorm that would expose a decades-old secret, shatter the hotel's flawless facade, and force a confrontation with a man far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The Beaumont Hotel was not merely a building on the Magnificent Mile. It was a carefully preserved artifact. It smelled of lemon polish, old money, and the faint floral scent of yesterday's triumphs. Its marble floors had been worn smooth by the footsteps of presidents and movie stars, its dark wood walls absorbing the whispered secrets of the city's elite for nearly a century. To work there was to be a custodian of this legacy, a role that demanded invisible perfection. For Amelia Mia Vance, age 24, perfection was a mask she wore with the same practiced ease as her starched white apron. Each shift was an 8-hour performance of grace under pressure. She could balance a tray of champagne flutes while navigating a crowded dining room, recite the evening specials with a placid smile, and anticipate a patron's desire for more water before they even reach for their glass. But beneath the serene exterior, a frantic calculator was always running, her father's mounting nursing home bills, the ever-present threat of eviction from her cramped Lincoln Park studio, the student debt that felt less like a loan and more like an anchor, pulling her deeper into the cold, dark waters of insolvency. The Beaumont was her lifeboat, but it was taking on water fast. The man who would come to be known only as Mr. Sato arrived on a blustery Tuesday afternoon. There was no fleet of black sedans, no clamoring entourage. He simply appeared at the front desk, a small, bird-like man in a perfectly tailored but unassuming tweed suit. He looked to be in his late 70s, his face a constellation of fine wrinkles, his posture ramrod straight with a kind of dignity that seemed almost defiant. He checked in under the single name, carrying only one small, well-worn leather suitcase. The crisis began the moment he opened his mouth and said nothing. Or rather, he spoke, but in a stream of soft, formal Japanese that fell on the polished front desk like a scattering of unreadable pebbles. He gestured, he bowed, he smiled a patient, almost beatific smile, but he did not possess a single word of English. The concierge, a man who prided himself on his passable French and conversational Spanish, was useless. A translation app was procured, its tinny, robotic voice only adding to the confusion. Mr. Sato would listen to the garbled output, offer another polite bow, and shake his head with gentle regret. Within a day, he had graduated from a curiosity to a full-blown operational nightmare. Mr. Arthur Albright, the hotel manager, was a man whose ambition was matched only by his anxiety. He saw the Beaumont not as a hotel, but as his personal kingdom, and Mr. Sato was a peasant revolt in the making. He ordered the beef Wellington 4 times yesterday, Albright lamented, pacing the staff break room, his hands slicing through the air. We bring it. He looks at it. He shakes his head. The food cost is becoming an issue. He points at the television, so we turn it on. He shakes his head. We change the channel. More shaking. It's like trying to communicate with a house plant. The staff, taking their cue from their manager, quickly adopted an air of weary condescension. Whispers and stifled snickers followed Mr. Sato as he moved through the hotel's public spaces. He would spend hours in the hushed, wood-paneled bar, not drinking, but simply watching the motes of dust dance in the afternoon sun. He'd sit in the lobby, observing the endless ballet of arrivals and departures with an unnerving, zen-like stillness. His silence became an accusation, an irritant in the finely tuned machine of the hotel. He was the weird old man in 912, the wealthy but senile tourist who was a collective problem to be managed until his credit card was declined. Mia watched the unfolding drama with a familiar ache in her chest. She saw the porter setting his suitcase down with a little too much force. She heard the exasperated sighs from the room service attendants. She saw the way Tiffany, another waitress who moved with the predatory grace of a shark, would deliberately ignore his table until he was the very last one left in the dining room. They all saw an inconvenience. Mia, for reasons she kept locked away like a painful heirloom, saw a man adrift. There was a clarity in his gaze, a sharp intelligence that belied the staff's narrative of senility. He wasn't confused, he was observant. He was searching for something. Her connection to his world was a ghost that walked beside her every day. Her father, Sergeant Major Thomas Vance, had been a career Marine stationed in Okinawa for 6 years. Mia was born there, and her first words were a jumble of English and Japanese. Her mother, a gentle soul from rural Georgia, had embraced the culture with a passion, learning the language, the customs, the cooking. Mia's earliest memories were not of Chicago's gray winters, but of the vibrant colors of a Japanese market, the scent of cherry blossoms, the sound of her mother's voice singing her to sleep with traditional folk songs. The language was the melody of her childhood, a time before her mother's sudden death in a car crash, a time before her father returned to the States a broken man, a time before the Parkinson's diagnosis that had begun its slow, cruel theft of his strength and dignity. After her father's illness had progressed to the point of needing round-the-clock care, that part of her life had been sealed off. Speaking Japanese felt like pressing on a bruise. It was the language of a life that had been promised but never delivered, a life of stability and love that had been replaced by the relentless, grinding reality of her present. On the fourth day of Mr. Sato's stay, the unspoken Cold War between him and the hotel staff erupted into open conflict. It began, as these things often do, over a seemingly trivial matter. Mr. Sato was seated in the Beaumont's grand dining room, the Sovereign, for his evening meal. He had tried, with a series of precise, delicate gestures, to convey a request to Tiffany. He pointed to his empty water glass, then made a gentle rocking motion with his hand, then held up 2 fingers. "He wants 2 more waters? What is that, a rocking boat?" Tiffany sneered to Mia as she swept past the service station. "He's probably asking for a diaper change." Tiffany, whose ambition was to be Albright's assistant manager, viewed any deviation from the norm as a personal affront. Kindness was a currency she didn't trade in. She returned to his table, slammed down a pitcher of ice water, and refilled his glass with a theatrical sigh. Mr. Sato watched her, his expression unchanged. He then repeated the gestures. The glass, the rocking motion, 2 fingers. "I don't know what you want, old man," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with contempt, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Just point to something on the menu, for God's sake." Mr. Albright was summoned. He arrived at the table, his face a mask of forced cordiality that barely concealed his boiling frustration. "Sir," he began, speaking slowly and loudly, as if Mr. Sato were a disobedient dog. "Can I help you?" Mr. Sato looked at him, then calmly took a small, leather-bound notebook from his jacket pocket. He uncapped a fountain pen, and with a few elegant strokes, wrote several Japanese characters. He presented the notebook to Albright. Albright stared at the beautiful, incomprehensible script as if it were a ransom note. He thrust it at Tiffany. "What is this? Can you make it out?" "It looks like chicken scratch to me," she scoffed. "Honestly, Arthur, this is ridiculous. He's tormenting us on purpose." The ambient chatter of the dining room began to die down as patrons turned to watch the uncomfortable spectacle at table 9. The air grew thick with a uniquely social humiliation, the kind that thrives under the judgmental gaze of the wealthy. Mia was at a nearby table, meticulously crumbing the tablecloth, her back to the scene, but she could feel the waves of animosity rolling off her manager and colleague. She heard the clink of Mr. Sato's pen as he capped it, and then she heard him speak. His voice was not loud, but it was clear and carried a quiet authority that cut through the tension. He spoke a single, perfectly formed Japanese sentence. Mia froze, the silver crummer still in her hand. The words were more than just familiar. They were a key turning a lock in the deepest part of her memory. They were specific, nuanced. He wasn't just making a random request. He was asking for something from her childhood, something her mother used to make for her father when he was feeling unwell. Tiffany threw her hands up in theatrical despair. More gibberish! He's completely lost it! Something inside Mia, a tightly coiled spring of grief and frustration, finally snapped. It was the casual cruelty, the willful ignorance. It was a dismissal not just of this dignified old man, but of her mother's memory, of the beautiful, complex world she had so lovingly shared. It was an insult to her father, a man who had taught her that respect was the one thing you gave freely, especially to those who couldn't demand it. She placed the crummer on her tray and set it down at the service station. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to remain invisible, to keep her head down, to just get through the shift. But her father's voice, raspy but firm, echoed in her mind. Stand for something, Amelia, or you'll get knocked over by anything. She turned, smoothed her apron, and began the long walk across the dining room toward table 9. Albright saw her approaching, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure fury. Vance, what in God's name do you think you're doing? He hissed under his breath. Get back to your station. Mia didn't even look at him. Her entire focus was on Mr. Sato. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable, but his gaze was as sharp and penetrating as a surgeon's scalpel. She took a half step, stopped, and bowed slightly from the waist. A gesture of respect her mother had insisted was more important than any word. Then she spoke. The Japanese flowed from her lips, feeling both alien and as natural as breathing. Her voice was steady and clear. Forgive their misunderstanding, sir, she said in perfect, formal Japanese. You would like ochazuke, with grilled salmon and a pot of genmaicha to pour over it? The silence that descended upon the dining room was absolute, as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound out of the air. Tiffany's perfectly painted mouth fell open. The couple at the adjacent table stopped their conversation mid-sentence. Arthur Albright looked as though he had been tasered. Mr. Sato's face, for the first time since his arrival, transformed. The serene, impenetrable mask dissolved, replaced by a look of profound, unadulterated astonishment. A slow, genuine smile spread across his lips, reaching his eyes and making them sparkle with a sudden, intense light. He looked directly at Mia, a universe of questions in his gaze, and then he replied in Japanese. The world seemed to contract, creating an invisible bubble around their table. The clatter of silverware, the murmur of other diners, the apoplectic glower from her manager, it all faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. There was only the quiet, resonant cadence of the language of her childhood flowing between them. You understand, Mr. Sato said, his voice a low, smooth baritone filled with surprise and something else. Relief. Yes, that is precisely what I would like. It is a simple comfort. It is my pleasure, sir, Mia replied, bowing again, a warm flush rising on her cheeks. My mother often prepared it. I will see to it myself. She turned to face the petrified staff. Her entire demeanor shifted. The deferential waitress was gone, replaced by a woman in command. She switched back to English, her voice crisp and professional. I need 2 fillets of the Faroe Island salmon from the grill station, unseasoned, a bowl of steamed sushi rice, nori sesame seeds and scallions from the prep line, and I need a pot of the loose-leaf genmaicha from the high tea service. Now, please. Tiffany stared at her, her face a mask of disbelief and naked envy. You speak Japanese? Just get the salmon, Tiffany, Mia said. Her tone brooked no argument. As the kitchen staff scrambled to fulfill the first order they had actually understood in 4 days, Albright grabbed Mia's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. His face was a mottled red, a storm of fury and bewilderment. What was that, Vance? He whispered, his voice shaking with rage. Why the hell was that not in your file? Do you have any idea the kind of embarrassment you could have saved us? Mia coolly extricated her arm from his grasp. You never asked, she replied, her voice dangerously calm. And with all due respect, Mr. Albright, the problem wasn't a language barrier. It was a respect barrier. She walked away, leaving her manager speechless and sputtering, and returned to the table. The power dynamic in the room had been irrevocably altered. She was no longer Mia Vance, the struggling waitress. She was an interpreter, a bridge, the sole possessor of a key to a mystery that had confounded the entire hotel. When the components of the dish arrived, Mia prepared it herself at a side table, her movements fluid and sure, a muscle memory from a happier time. She flaked the salmon over the hot rice, sprinkled it with the toppings, and then presented it with a small ceramic teapot of green tea. Mr. Sato watched her every move, his intelligent eyes missing nothing. He poured the steaming, nutty-smelling tea over the rice and took his first bite. He closed his eyes, a look of sublime satisfaction on his face. "Perfect," he murmured in Japanese. "It tastes of home." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please, sit." For a waitress to sit with a guest in the Sovereign was a fireable offense, a violation of the sacred caste system of the hotel. Mia could see Albright in the corner of her eye, frantically making a throat-slitting gesture. She ignored him. She sat down. "Your accent," Mr. Sato observed, his gaze sharp and analytical. "It is not the flat, academic Japanese one learns in a university. It has a cadence. Okinawan, perhaps." "Yes, sir," Mia replied in Japanese, stunned by his perception. "I was born there. My father was stationed at Camp Foster." "A Marine," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "They carry themselves a certain way. Your father taught you discipline. Your mother taught you the heart of things." For the next hour, as the dinner service concluded around them, they spoke. He asked about her parents, her childhood, her reasons for being in Chicago. He spoke of the subtle differences in ceramics from Kyoto and Mashiko, of the poetry of Basho, of the changing light over the East China Sea. He never once mentioned business, wealth, or his purpose for being at the hotel. It was a conversation of profound depth and startling intimacy, a balm on a wound Mia hadn't realized was still so raw. She found herself speaking of her father's pride, his quiet strength even as his body betrayed him, in the crushing weight of a healthcare system that seemed designed to bankrupt the families of the men it claimed to honor. She was no longer Mia, the waitress. She was Amelia Vance, Thomas and Sarah's daughter, speaking the language of her soul. The rest of the hotel staff watched from a distance, a tableau of slack-jawed astonishment. Tiffany's face was a thundercloud of pure, unadulterated venom. She saw her carefully constructed path to power suddenly blocked by the quiet, mousy girl she had always held in contempt. Mia hadn't just solved a problem, she had made herself utterly, terrifyingly indispensable. From that moment on, a new and unspoken protocol was established at the Beaumont. All communications with Suite 912 were to be routed through Mia Vance. Albright, forced to swallow his pride, officially reassigned her. She was no longer a waitress. She was the special liaison to Mr. Sato, a title Albright had invented on the spot. The requests that followed were no longer a mystery. He wanted a go-board and stones. He asked for a specific brand of incense, shoyedo. He requested books on American mid-century architecture, specifically the works of Mies van der Rohe. Each time he would ask Mia, and she, drawing upon a well of knowledge she didn't know she possessed, would understand not just the words but the context behind them. That evening he summoned her to his suite. The room was sparsely furnished, dominated by a stunning view of the glittering city lights. Mr. Sato was not sitting in one of the plush armchairs. He was kneeling on a simple cushion on the floor, contemplating the go-board she had procured for him. "Your manager, Mr. Albright," he began in Japanese, placing a black stone on the board. "He believes I am a wealthy eccentric, a problem to be managed until my bill is paid." Mia stood silently by the door. "Your colleague, the one with the sharp eyes, she believes I am senile and foolish, an object of ridicule," he continued, placing another stone. "The concierge believes I am arrogant. They all see a caricature." He looked up from the board, and his gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. "Tell me, Vance-san, what do you see?" The question was a test, far more important than identifying the right kind of tea. She thought of his observant eyes, his patience, the quiet dignity that had been his only armor against their condescension. She thought of the way he listened, truly listened, to her story about her father. "I believe you are looking for something," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Something you believe has been lost, and I don't think you found it yet." He stopped playing. He carefully placed the stone back in its bowl and rose to his feet. The gentle, elderly facade seemed to melt away, replaced by the formidable presence of a man accustomed to command. It was the look of a hawk, and it sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "There is an old story," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, resonant tone. "A shogun wishes to build a new castle. He sends two masters to the same forest to find the perfect cornerstone. The first master is young and ambitious. He takes 100 men and they fell the largest, most magnificent tree they can find. They drag it back to the capital in 3 days, and a great celebration is held in his honor." He paused, holding her gaze. "The second master is old. He goes into the forest alone. He spends a week just walking, observing the trees, the wind, the way the light falls. He finds not the largest tree, but one that has grown against a cliff face, its grain hardened by decades of wind, its core unshakable. It takes him a month to bring it back, and by then, the celebration for the first master is long over." He is met with silence. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, which master would you trust to build your castle?" Mia knew this wasn't about castles or stones. It was a parable about business, about character. The easy answer was the second master, the one who valued quality. But she sensed it was more complex than that. She thought of her father, a man who could spend an entire day perfecting a single dovetail joint, not because he had to, but because it was the right way to do it. "They both have their uses," she began carefully, choosing her words as if placing her own stones on the go-board. "The first master understands speed and appearance. He can build something impressive quickly. But the second master," she hesitated, then found her conviction, "understands integrity. He knows that what you cannot see, the strength of the foundation, the quality of the core, is more important than what you can. The first master builds a castle for a parade. The second one builds a castle to withstand a siege." Mr. Sato's face remained impassive for a long, unnerving moment. He simply stared at her, his dark eyes seeming to peer directly into her soul. Mia's heart pounded. Had she given the wrong answer? Had she revealed a naivete he would find foolish? Then slowly, a brilliant, approving smile spread across his face. He walked to the door and held it open for her. "You may go," he said, his voice once again mild and grandfatherly. "Thank you for your time, Vance-san. You have been most insightful." As she walked down the silent, carpeted hallway, Mia felt a strange mix of triumph and unease. She had passed the test, but she was beginning to suspect that Mr. Sato was not a guest at all. He was a judge, and the entire hotel was on trial. The next morning, the game changed. A severe-looking woman in her late 40s, dressed in a brutally elegant gray suit, arrived at the hotel. Her name was Eleanor Vance, a strange coincidence of a surname that Mia noted with a flicker of curiosity, and she radiated an aura of hyper-competent, no-nonsense authority. She was not a guest. She was a field marshal arriving to survey the battlefield. She went straight to Albright's office. 10 minutes later, Mia was summoned. She found her manager looking pale and sweaty, while Eleanor sat opposite his desk, her posture as rigid as a steel rod. She held a tablet and didn't look up when Mia entered. "Vance," Albright began, his voice strained. "This is Ms. Vance. She is an associate of Mr. Sato. From now on, you will be reporting directly to her." Eleanor finally looked up. Her eyes were a pale, intelligent gray. "You are the interpreter," she stated as if confirming a data point. "I speak Japanese, yes," Mia managed. "We are aware," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Mr. Sato has been impressed with your discretion and contextual understanding. Your role is being formalized. You are his exclusive liaison. You will be on call 24 hours a day. You will facilitate all his communications, personal and professional." She named a weekly salary that was more than Mia earned in 2 months. Mia's breath caught in her throat. "You will also sign this," Eleanor continued, pushing a thick document across the desk. It was a non-disclosure agreement, dense with legal jargon and terrifying penalty clauses. Mia signed it, her hand trembling slightly. This was no longer about a lonely tourist. This was about something corporate, something immense and secret. Her new life began instantly. Mr. Sato's suite was converted into a strategic command center. Technicians arrived installing encrypted video conferencing equipment and satellite phones. Mia's job was to be Mr. Sato's voice and his ears. The calls began, spanning the globe. A team of engineers in Germany discussing the tensile strength of a new alloy. A group of venture capitalists in Silicon Valley debating the valuation of a biotech startup. A tense negotiation with a shipping magnate in Hong Kong. Mr. Sato was a master. He would listen to minutes of complex rapid-fire English, his eyes closed, his fingers steepled. Then he would open them and deliver a response in Japanese. Calm, precise, and devastatingly insightful. He cut through bluster and jargon, identifying the core issue with surgical precision. Mia, struggling to keep up, felt like a student in the presence of a genius. He was a puppeteer, and she was the one translating the movements of his hands for the world to understand. But as the days bled into a week, tiny dissonant notes began to disrupt the symphony. During a video conference with the Silicon Valley VCs, the cocky young CEO made a complex joke involving a classic Star Trek episode. A fraction of a second before Mia had finished translating the setup, Mr. Sato let out a small, dry chuckle. It was almost imperceptible, a ghost of a sound, but it snagged in Mia's mind. How could he possibly have gotten the joke that quickly? Another time, while they were reviewing a legal document from a London firm, he pointed to a specific clause and said in Japanese, "This is their Trojan horse." The term was correct, but it was an odd, almost literary choice for a native Japanese speaker of his generation, who would more likely have used a Japanese proverb. The most jarring incident came during a heated negotiation with the Hong Kong magnate. The man, frustrated, switched to Cantonese to curse at one of his aides. It was a short, vicious burst of profanity. Mr. Sato, who was looking down at his notes, flinched. It was a tiny, involuntary tightening of the muscles around his eyes, an expression of distaste that lasted only a second. But he shouldn't have understood Cantonese. And even if he did, he shouldn't have reacted to the emotional content of a language he wasn't supposed to know. The thought began to form in Mia's mind, a wild, impossible theory she tried to smother. It was absurd, it was paranoid. She was overworked, reading too much into meaningless tics. This man was her savior. He treated her with a deep paternal respect. He had taken her from the edge of financial ruin and given her purpose. To doubt him felt like a profound betrayal, but the seeds had been planted. Who was Mr. Sato? Why was this brilliant, powerful man conducting a global business empire under this bizarre, elaborate cloak of silence? What was the purpose of the grand deception? Mia felt as if she were a character in a spy novel, and she was beginning to fear that the kind, elderly man she was serving was not the protagonist. He was the spy master, and his motives were a complete and terrifying mystery. The climax of Mr. Sato's Chicago visit was to be a face-to-face meeting with Marcus Thorne, a notoriously ruthless real estate developer. Thorne was trying to acquire a block of historic properties adjacent to the Beaumont, including the old Colfax building, a landmark of Chicago school architecture. The negotiations, conducted through Mia, had been contentious. Thorne was everything Mr. Sato seemed to dislike: loud, arrogant, and openly dismissive of history and tradition. The deal was the linchpin of Mr. Sato's entire trip. The night before the meeting, Mr. Sato seemed unusually contemplative. He had dismissed Eleanor early and asked Mia to stay and review the final offer documents. "You are quiet this evening, Vancy-san," he said in Japanese, his eyes on the go-board. "Just thinking about tomorrow, sir," she replied, which was only partly a lie. She decided to risk it, to gently pull at one of the loose threads that had been unraveling her peace of mind. "Sir," she began, her voice carefully neutral, "during the call with the technology firm last week, you laughed at the Star Trek joke before I had finished translating it. I was just curious. How did you know?" The silence in the suite stretched, becoming taut and heavy. Mr. Sato did not look up from the board, but a stillness came over him, the focused calm of a chess master who realizes his opponent has seen his gambit. "My hearing is better than my English," he replied smoothly. "I recognize the rhythms of humor in the CEO's voice. I was laughing in anticipation of your excellent translation." The explanation was perfect, too perfect. It was an answer that had been prepared. Mia felt a chill. And the Trojan horse metaphor? She pressed, emboldened. It's a very Western reference. He finally looked up, his smile disarmingly gentle. I have spent a lifetime doing business with Westerners. One absorbs certain phrases, like a ship collecting barnacles. You are exceptionally observant. It is a great gift. He had deflected masterfully. He had praised her while revealing nothing. She let it go, but the suspicion now burned like a fever. The next day, Marcus Thorne and his team of lawyers swept into the Beaumont's main conference room. Thorne was a large man who filled any room he entered. He wore an expensive suit like a suit of armor and had a handshake that felt like a declaration of war. He oozed a predatory confidence. Mr. Sato entered a moment later, leaning on a simple cypress cane Mia had never seen before. He seemed smaller, more frail, the perfect image of a venerable foreign elder. Mia walked beside him, her notebook in hand. Eleanor followed, a silent sentinel. Albright hovered by the door, wringing his hands. Mr. Sato! Thorne boomed, not bothering to wait for a translation. Thorne! Marcus Thorne! Good to finally put a face to the name. Let's make this quick, shall we? I've got a tea time at 3. Mr. Sato offered a simple, silent bow. Mia began to translate, but Thorne waved her off. Yeah, I get it. Let's cut to the chase. He launched into his final terms, which were even more aggressive than his previous offers. He spoke of demolition, of tearing down the obsolete Colfax building to erect a glass and steel monument to himself. He used phrases like inevitable progress and clearing away the dead wood. He spoke with open contempt for the history he was seeking to erase. At one point, he gestured dismissively toward Mr. Sato and said to his lawyer, He doesn't get it. These old-timers are sentimental. Money is the only language they really understand in the end. Mia translated faithfully, her own anger a cold knot in her stomach. Mr. Sato listened, his face an unreadable, placid mask. She saw his hand, the one not on the cane, tighten slightly. When Thorne finally finished his tirade, he sat back, a smug look on his face. So, do we have a deal, or do I need to have my girl here draw you some pictures? All eyes turned to Mr. Sato. Mia leaned in, ready for the Japanese reply. He took a long, slow breath. He placed both hands flat on the polished mahogany table. He looked up, not at Mia, but directly into Marcus Thorne's arrogant eyes. When he spoke, his voice was not the soft, accented Japanese she knew. It was a clear, cold, resonant baritone, speaking flawless, unaccented American English. Mr. Thorne, he said, the words dropping into the stunned silence of the room like chips of ice. Your offer is an insult, your attitude is a disgrace, and your assumption that I cannot understand your language is surpassed only by your staggering ignorance of whom you are speaking to. The shock in the room was a physical force. Marcus Thorne's jaw dropped. His lawyers froze, their pens hovering over their notepads. Albright by the door actually gasped. Mia felt as if the floor had vanished from beneath her feet. Her mind went completely blank. Every conversation, every shared confidence, every moment of perceived connection replayed in her mind, now hideously warped and recast in the light of this monumental deception. It was all a lie, a performance, and she had been his primary, unwitting prop. The man who called himself Sato slowly pushed his chair back and rose to his full height. He no longer seemed small or frail. He seemed to fill the room, his presence radiating an aura of absolute, indisputable power that made Thorne's bluster look like a child's tantrum. The cypress cane lay forgotten against his chair. My name, he announced, his voice like cracking granite, is not Sato. It is Julian Croft. The name landed with the force of a physical blow. Julian Croft, the legendary, mythically reclusive founder and CEO of Croft Technologies, one of the most powerful and secretive tech conglomerates in the world. A man who hadn't been photographed in 20 years. A genius, a philanthropist, a ruthless titan of industry who was rumored to have disappeared from public life. A man who was most certainly not Japanese. That's impossible, Thorne stammered, his face turning a pasty white. Is it? Croft replied, a thin, dangerous smile on his lips. You saw what you wanted to see, Mr. Thorne? An easy mark. An old foreigner you could swindle. You never once bothered to look at the man. And in your haste to tear down a beautiful, historic building, you failed to do the most basic due diligence. He gestured toward Mia. This young woman in a single evening showed more perception, integrity, and respect than you have demonstrated in a month of negotiations. Croft then turned to one of Thorne's lawyers. And you, sir, might want to advise your client that his proposed plan to circumvent the landmark preservation ordinances by falsifying structural integrity reports constitutes felony fraud. I know this because my foundation commissioned the real report 3 weeks ago. Mia's mind raced. That was it. The books on architecture, his quiet observance of the building next door. It wasn't sentiment, it was reconnaissance. Thorne was apoplectic, his face purple with rage. You can't prove a thing. Oh, I think I can, Mia said, her voice shaking but clear. Everyone turned to look at her. She had been a ghost in the room, but now she was solid, present. She remembered something from the blueprints Thorne had casually unfurled on the table earlier, a detail she had noticed because her father, a meticulous craftsman, had taught her to always check the foundations. Your plans, she said, looking directly at Thorne. You have the demolition crew starting on the western load-bearing wall. But the city ordinance from 1928, the one that grandfathered the Colfax building's landmark status, specifically protects that wall because it supports the foundation of the adjacent historical charity hospital. Tearing it down isn't just fraud, it's reckless endangerment. The room fell silent again. Thorne's face went from purple to ashen. She had him. Her small, specific piece of knowledge, gleaned from a lifetime of respecting the things her father valued, was the final, devastating blow. Julian Croft looked at Mia, and in his eyes she saw not the kind Mr. Sato or the cold CEO, but something else, genuine, unadulterated respect. Eleanor, Croft said calmly, please show Mr. Thorne and his associates the door. I believe their business in Chicago is concluded. Humiliated and utterly defeated, Thorne's team shuffled out of the room. Albright quietly fainted against the doorframe. Mia remained in her chair, her world tilted on its axis, staring at the man who was not Mr. Sato. He turned his piercing gaze to her. Amelia, he said, and hearing her name in his real voice was the most disorienting experience of her life. I believe you and I have a great deal to talk about. She had been more than a liaison, more than a translator. She had been the final, crucial piece in a billion-dollar game of corporate warfare, played by a ghost she had never truly seen. And now she had to decide if she was his pawn or his queen. The conference room, stripped of its dramatic tension, felt vast and unnervingly quiet. Julian Croft stood by the window, a silhouette against the gray Chicago sky. He looked less like a businessman and more like a king, surveying his domain. The transformation was so complete, it was difficult to reconcile him with the gentle, unassuming Mr. Sato. I imagine you have questions, he said, his back still to her. His voice was the calm, measured tone of a man who had anticipated every possible outcome. Mia found her voice, though it felt like a stranger's in her own throat. Was any of it real? The deception was real. The observations were real, he said, turning to face her. There was no apology in his eyes, just the cool clarity of a master strategist explaining his moves. The persona of Mr. Sato was a construct, a tool. I call it an integrity audit. I present myself as a person with no discernible power or influence, and I watch. It is the most effective way to see people for who they truly are, stripped of the sycophancy that wealth and power attract. So I was a test, she said, the words tasting like ash. My father's illness, my financial problems. You knew all of that? I knew you were in a precarious situation, he admitted, his gaze unwavering. My research is thorough, but the details of your life, the stories you shared, those were variables I could not predict. Your reaction was the experiment. The coldness of it, the clinical detachment, was staggering. Why? She asked, a surge of anger finally burning through the shock. Why go through this elaborate, cruel circus just to humiliate Marcus Thorne? Thorne was a target of opportunity, not the primary objective, Croft corrected her. He is a symptom of a disease I've spent my life fighting. greed that masquerades as progress. My real purpose in Chicago was far more important. He walked slowly toward the table, his movements lithe and energetic, belying the age he had so convincingly portrayed. For the last decade, I have been planning the establishment of the Croft Legacy Foundation. It will be the sole beneficiary of my entire fortune upon my death. Its mandate will be twofold: the preservation of cultural and architectural heritage and the provision of lifelong support for veterans and their families. He stopped in front of her, his eyes locking onto hers. The foundation needs a director, not a slick executive from my company, not a pedigreed academic. It needs someone with a rare combination of skills: cultural fluency, an appreciation for history, deep empathy, and an unshakable moral compass. It needs someone who understands that a foundation's strength, like a castle's, is not in its size but in the integrity of its core. The pieces fell into place, forming a picture so vast and audacious that Mia felt dizzy. "The Shogun's masters," she whispered. "Indeed," he said, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "I have been searching for the second master for 5 years. I've interviewed dozens of high-powered candidates. They all knew how to build the impressive castle. None of them understood the importance of the cornerstone." He gestured toward her. "You do. You showed it when you chose to help a silent old man. You proved it when you understood the parable. And you cemented it when you found the flaw in Thorne's foundation, not through greed or ambition, but through a genuine respect for the principles your father taught you." He was offering her the world, a solution to every problem that haunted her waking moments, and a purpose that aligned perfectly with the memory of her parents. It was a dream forged from a nightmare of deception. "I am not offering you a job, Amelia," Julian Croft said, his voice ringing with a conviction that seemed to vibrate in the air. "I am offering you a legacy. I want you to run my foundation. I want you to take the principles you defended in this room and apply them on a global scale. I want you to build things that withstand sieges." He named a salary that was a string of impossible numbers. He spoke of resources that could change thousands of lives, of a platform to champion the very things she held sacred. It was a golden key to a life she had never dared to imagine. But it had been presented to her by a man who had manipulated her, lied to her, and used her deepest vulnerabilities as part of his grand design. "I need to think," she said, her voice barely audible. The weight of the decision was immense. Could she place her trust in a man whose greatest talent was deception? And in her desperate situation, could she possibly afford not to? Mia left the conference room and walked through the hotel in a daze. The familiar hallways now seemed like a movie set whose purpose was finished. She saw Tiffany and a few other waiters huddled together, whispering furiously. When they saw her, they fell silent, their expressions a cocktail of fear, envy, and awe. She was no longer one of them. She was something other, something unknown. She found herself in the hotel's empty ballroom, the cavernous space where she had once served champagne at a charity gala, feeling utterly invisible. She sat on the edge of the stage, the ghost of Mr. Sato on one shoulder, and the formidable reality of Julian Croft on the other. The betrayal was a sharp physical pain. He had played on her decency, used her empathy as a litmus test, but beneath the anger was a strange, disquieting sense of validation. For years she had felt like a ghost. Her skills and passions, the language, the cultural knowledge, the quiet integrity inherited from her parents, devalued and ignored. Julian Croft, through his Machiavellian methods, had been the only person to see her true worth. He hadn't just offered her a job. He had held up a mirror and shown her a version of herself she had forgotten existed. Her phone vibrated, a message from the nursing home. "Your father had a good day. He beat Mr. Henderson at checkers twice. He asked about you." The simple message cut through the fog of her confusion. This was the cornerstone. Her father, his care, his dignity, her mother's legacy. A shuffling sound made her look up. Arthur Albright was standing in the doorway of the ballroom, looking like a man who had just survived a shipwreck. "Vance, Amelia," he said, his voice slick with a desperate, unearned familiarity. I just wanted to say, on behalf of the entire hotel, congratulations. I always knew you were destined for great things." The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost cleansing. She saw him clearly then, just as Croft saw him, a hollow man, a builder of impressive but empty castles. "Thank you, Mr. Albright," she said, standing up. "I have to make a call." She walked away, leaving him in the echoing silence of the grand ballroom, a relic of the life she was about to utterly demolish and rebuild. She knew her answer. Trusting Julian Croft would be a calculated risk, a high-stakes game of go against a grandmaster. But he had not just offered her a place on the board. He had offered her a chance to play for her own side. He had tested her character, and in doing so, had revealed his own. He was ruthless, yes, but for a purpose she could believe in. She took the elevator back to the conference floor. She found Croft exactly where she had left him, standing by the window in quiet conversation with Eleanor. They both turned as she entered. Mia walked directly to him, her posture straight, her gaze meeting his without a trace of intimidation. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong, "but I have conditions." A flicker of amusement, of deep respect, danced in Croft's eyes. Eleanor remained impassive, but Mia thought she saw a hint of approval. "First," Mia said, "complete transparency. You will never lie to me or to the Foundation again. Our work will be built on a foundation of truth, or it will not be built by me at all." "Agreed," Croft said instantly. "Second, the Foundation's first official act will be to create and fully endow a new wing at the VA hospital specializing in neurodegenerative diseases. It will be named the Sergeant Major Thomas Vance Center for Veteran Care." A slow, genuine smile spread across Julian Croft's face. It was the same smile she had seen on Mr. Sato's face when she had first understood him, but this time it felt completely real. "A worthy cornerstone, Ms. Vance." "Agreed." "And third," she said, taking a deep breath, "I want you to come with me this Sunday to meet my father, not as a billionaire, but as the man who hired his daughter. I want you to sit with him, listen to his stories, and see the man whose integrity you claim to admire so much." This gave him pause. This was her test for him, a test of humility. The world's most reclusive man making a personal visit to a retired Marine in a state-run nursing home. He studied her for a long moment, the brilliant strategist evaluating an unexpected and brilliant move from his new opponent. Then he nodded slowly. "I would be honored," he said. In that moment, Mia knew she had made the correct decision. She was no longer a piece in his game. She was a player, and she was about to write her own rules. 2 weeks later, Mia stood in the quiet, sterile hallway of the veteran's home. Julian Croft was beside her, dressed not in a bespoke suit, but in simple slacks and a cashmere sweater, holding a small, thoughtfully chosen gift. Inside, her father, Thomas Vance, sat in his wheelchair by the window. The tremors in his hands stilled for a moment as he watched them approach. "It's an honor to meet you, Sergeant Major," Croft said, his voice gentle, extending a hand not for a shake, but as a simple gesture of respect. "The honor's mine," her father replied, his own voice raspy but warm. "Mia tells me you're putting her in charge of quite an operation. Always knew she was a commanding officer in the making." "She's my new partner," Croft corrected softly, "and she's already taught me a great deal." For the next hour, Mia watched as the reclusive genius sat and listened with rapt attention as her father spoke about his time in Okinawa, about the importance of a polished boot and a clean rifle, about the quiet dignity of a job well done. Croft didn't analyze or test. He simply learned, absorbing the hard-won wisdom of a man who had built his life on a foundation of duty and honor. As they prepared to leave, Croft turned to her father. "Sir, your daughter once told me a story about a master builder who knew how to find the strongest cornerstone." He paused, his gaze filled with a sincerity that was undeniable. "But the wisest man of all is the one who teaches his child how to build a strong character." "Thank you." In the car on the way back, Mia asked about the gift. "A first-edition copy of a book on Japanese castle construction," Croft explained. "I thought he might appreciate the craftsmanship." It was a gesture of pure, uncalculated empathy. It was proof that he was capable of listening, of understanding, of respecting the core of a person. It was a sign that their foundation would be a solid one. The following Monday, Mia walked through the imposing glass doors of the Croft Technologies Tower. Her name was already on the directory in the lobby. Amelia Vance, Executive Director, the Croft Legacy Foundation. Her new office had a view that seemed to encompass the entire city, a world of possibility laid out at her feet. On the polished expanse of her new desk sat a single object, the small, simple ceramic teapot from the Beaumont. Beside it was a note in Croft's elegant script, a reminder that the most important work begins with a simple act of understanding. "Welcome, Amelia. Let's get to work." She smiled, a true, unburdened smile. The journey had been a bewildering labyrinth of lies, but it had led her here, to a place of profound and unshakable truth. She understood Julian Croft now, his complex language of tests and tactics, of ruthlessness in the service of a greater good. He had seen her value when no one else had, and now she was ready to prove him right. With her mother's heart as her compass and her father's integrity as her cornerstone, she was ready to start building.